Much obliged for your company and our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Ukraine blames Russia for missiles that killed 3, including 2 children, in Kiev in an early morning attack. The U.S. says it does not know who is responsible for the drone attack on Moscow earlier this week. Plus, German government to shut down 4 out of 5 Russian consulates. Moscow slams the move. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Officials in the Ukrainian capital say a Russian missile attack on Kiev killed 3 people, including 2 children, and injured 14 others. The Kiev military administration said in a statement the attack struck the region on the capital of the eastern outskirts, as well as the Dnipropetrovsky district, close to the center. It was the 18th attack on the capital this month. Kiev Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said 9 people needed hospital treatment, adding that a medical clinic had been hit as well. Emergency crews had extinguished fires caused by falling debris near the site of the strikes. Air raid alerts in Kiev and in most of eastern Ukraine were in effect for about an hour. Meanwhile, dashboard camera captured the moment when a part of a missile fell next to a car driving on Kiev Road as Russia attacked the Ukrainian capital. The video shows part of the missile falling onto the road right in front of a driving car, as you can see, which they continued to drive on. Authorities said all the Russian missiles were shot down, but 1 person in the central Podil district was taken to hospital, adding that no major damage was reported. Russia has increased the frequency of air attacks as Ukraine prepares to launch a counter-offensive. 5 people have been killed and 19 others wounded in Ukrainian shelling of a village in the Russian-controlled East Ukrainian region of Luhansk. A Moscow-installed coordination center says the Ukrainian forces had used HIMARS rocket launchers to attack a poultry farm in the village of Karpaty, adding that a camp of road construction workers and their vehicles have been hit as well. However, there was no immediate response from Ukraine, but Kiev almost never publicly claims responsibility for attacks in Russian-controlled territory in Ukraine or in Russia. Both sides deny targeting civilians in the 15-month-long war Russia is calling a special military operation that it launched in February 2022. Meanwhile, the White House National Security spokesperson, Mr. John Kirby, says the Joe Biden administration does not know who is responsible for a drone attack in Moscow this week. Speaking to reporters, Mr. Kirby says the U.S. does not have specific information that tells who is responsible for the attack on the apartment building in Moscow, adding that Ukraine had denied responsibility. Asked whether the attack was part of the Ukrainian spring offensive, he says, in his words, it is up to the Ukrainian military to explain when and how their counteroffensive starts.
The Ukrainian denial that they had anything to do. You're talking about the drone strike on the apartment building in Moscow. So we'd refer you to the Ukrainian government to speak to that. We don't have any specific information that tells us who is responsible. And it's not like we're going to go out and investigate this. It's not, that wouldn't be appropriate for us to do. And then your second question on the counteroffensive, again, we would let President Zelensky speak to this. Wherever, whenever the Ukrainian military is ready to step off here and get started, that's really going to be up to them to talk about and to explain. I would just tell you that over just the last few weeks alone, there has been a lot of fighting and a lot of back and forth here.
Meanwhile, the White House announced the latest in a series of aid packages for Ukraine that includes up to $300 million worth of air defense systems, ammunition, and other defense equipment. The Pentagon says the security assistance package represents the 39th drawdown of equipment from the Department of Defense inventories. That package includes Patriot air defense batteries, Stinger anti-aircraft systems, tank ammunition, and a list of other equipment. In total, the U.S. has committed more than $38.3 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since the beginning of the Biden administration, including more than $37.6 billion since Russia's invasion in February 2022.
Russia has continued to wage just a brutal, completely unprovoked war against Ukraine, launching yet more airstrikes and bombarding Ukrainian cities all across the country. In fact, in just this here month of May, Russia's launched 17 different air assaults against Kiev, harming civilians, devastating civilian areas, hitting civilian infrastructure. Now, in response, the United States is going to continue to support Ukraine, help give them things that they need to better defend themselves. As part of all that effort, we've got an upcoming package here, which will be the 39th drawdown of equipment from the Department of Defense inventories using presidential drawdown authorities. We will use that package that we're announcing today to provide Ukraine with additional munitions for Patriot air defense systems, which Ukraine has been deploying quite effectively, as well as more Avenger air defense systems, Stinger anti-aircraft systems, and ammunition, of course, for the HIMARS, artillery, and anti-armor systems that the United States continues to provide to Ukraine. And as for the debt ceiling deal, it won't, no matter what happens in the halls of Congress, there won't be an effect on our ability to support Ukraine.
Back in Russia, Wagner mercenary boss Yevgeny Prigozhin says he has asked prosecutors to investigate crimes committed by senior Russian defense officials before and during Moscow's military campaign in Ukraine. Prigozhin said in his words, "Today I have sent letters to the investigative committee and the prosecutor's office of the Russian Federation with a request to check whether a crime was committed during the preparation and execution of the special military operation by a number of senior functionaries of the Russian Defense Ministry. These letters will not be published due to the fact that the investigative authorities will deal with this." However, the Defense Ministry declined immediate comment. Prigozhin, the founder of the Wagner mercenary group, has repeatedly accused Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and other top officials of sabotaging Russia's military campaign in Ukraine. The German Federal Foreign Office says the German government will close 4 out of the 5 Russian consulates in the country by revoking their licenses after Moscow limited the number of German officials in Russia. According to the office, the Russian embassy in Berlin, as well as one consulate general, will continue to operate. The measures will take effect from the end of the year. Germany's move comes after the Russian government set an upper limit of 350 for the number of German government officials, including those working in cultural institutions and schools who can't stay in Russia. Germany and Russia have repeatedly expelled each other's diplomats. However, the situation has worsened considerably since the start of the crisis in Ukraine, which led to the massive sanctions against Russia by the EU. Meanwhile, Moscow has said Germany's decision to reduce Russia's diplomatic presence on its soil was an ill-thought-out move and vowed to respond. The Russian Foreign Ministry issued a statement saying that Germany's decision was unfriendly and further damaged the relationship between the two countries, and the German side should be responsible for the deterioration of the relationship between the two countries. According to the statement, the Russian side will also take corresponding action against such provocative decisions. A spokesman for the Russian Foreign Ministry says the limitation was a response to Germany's previous expulsion of Russian diplomats. A fire that broke out at the Afipsky oil refinery in Russia's Krasnodar region was likely caused by a drone. That's according to the region's governor. The governor says the fire was soon extinguished and there were no casualties. The refinery lies not far from the Black Sea port in Krasnodar. There was no immediate information on who launched the drone, but Russia has accused Ukraine of increased attacks on targets inside the country, including on Moscow on Tuesday. Ukraine almost never publicly claims responsibility for attacks inside Russia or on Russian-controlled territory in Ukraine. Now let's talk to Mr. Alexi Izak, head of Sector, National Institute for Strategic Studies, Ukraine, who joins us virtually from Dnipro. It's good to see you with us this morning.
Good morning.
Let me begin with condolences for the casualties suffered in this most recent drone attacks. We understand that some people lost their lives. We don't know the number to be specific, but we know that that has happened. And when fatalities become statistics, then it just hardens people to the ongoing war. So our condolences for the casualties in this conflict. But Mr. Alexi, vis-a-vis the attacks in Moscow and the denial by Ukraine that they had no hand in it, and the talk by James Cleverly of the UK and the the German top-level official who says that Ukraine has a right to defend itself outside its borders by attacking Russia if it's so provoked. And James Cleverly also said the same thing. But the German official said that Ukraine has the right to extend its defense inside Russia, but they shouldn't use German weapons. So now, can you give us an overview of what your impression is of these attacks outside Ukraine, in Moscow, and why Ukraine is denying it, and why the UK and Germany seem to be supporting it, but not totally?
My view is that these events may be called just events. It's clearly it's a part of war. It's a consequence of war. It's a consequence of what Russia is doing. Really, Ukraine, in most situations, does not recognize nor deny this Ukraine's involvement in these events, but it's clear that it's part of war. Certainly, it may be own Russian provocation to change internal policy. We saw the same situation during Chechen wars when Russian combusted civilian houses to create sense of mobilization. But it also may be some other forces. It might be Russian patriots who act from outside of Russia to change regime in Russia. It's also maybe a case, but it certainly may be a case of Ukraine involvement. But official position is that Ukraine does not recognize and does not deny such involvement. As to international view on it, the main red line for Ukraine's actions outside national territory to stop this war, to bring it to Ukraine's victory, is that most sophisticated Western weapons should not be used in Russia. Especially it regards to weapons of nuclear weapon states, such as United States and United Kingdom, because it is dangerous because of possible nuclear escalation. If Russia believes that its direct participation of United States or United Kingdom in this war, or maybe France, it might be a pretext for nuclear escalation. But in most situations, international position of Ukraine's partners is that it's legitimate right of Ukraine to conduct any operation that is necessary to bring the end to this war. And if we have an imminent preparation of attack on Ukrainian or on Russian territory, it's obvious that Ukraine can attack Russian forces on its own territories, which are prepared to launch another advance in Ukraine. The only limitation on behalf of Germans and the United Kingdom, the only two states until now officially declared that Ukraine has this right to act on Russian territory. The only limitation, as I understand it, is that Ukraine should adhere to customs of war, to international humanitarian law. It means that Ukrainian forces in Russia should not behave the same way as Russian forces behaved in Ukraine during occupation. So I believe that it's possible. It's legal, but there are some limitations. I told you that Ukraine should adhere to customs of war, and Ukraine should not try to annex territories, as Russia tries to do with Ukrainian territories. And also, I believe there is a limitation on use of sophisticated Western weapons. Those drones that attacked Russia during recent weeks, they don't have any roots in Western technology. It's something new. It might be produced by Ukraine. It might be converted from Chinese drones. It may be anything, but it's not Western weapons.
Let's bring Germany into it again. So Germany says that use weapons outside Ukraine to infiltrate Russia, but don't use our weapons. What do you make of that?
It means that Ukraine will not use German weapons during operation if they happen outside of Ukrainian territory. And in fact, there is no need to use Japan weapons like main battle tanks, the Leopards, to conduct any operation in Russia, because Ukraine does not have any intention to occupy Russian territories. Only some operation to disrupt military transport to Ukraine and movement of Russian forces on borders with Ukraine. But what we have from Russia, it's main battle tanks, any armor, some other armor vehicles, and also artillery. So there is no necessity for Ukraine to use German weapons on territory of Russia, only on territory of Ukraine to deoccupy this territory. It's very useful for the occupation, but no need to use outside of Ukraine. And by the way, Ukraine have enough own weapons, that is not neither German nor American to use in some operation outside of Ukraine. And all operations that were conducted or may be attributed to Ukraine as conducted on Russian territory were conducted without use of Western weapons.
Still on Germany, Mr. Izak, it seems they're going out of their way to show their disapproval of the Russian invasion in a tit-for-tat, what's good for the goose, what is good for the gander. They're expelling Russian diplomatic personnel from Germany. But before that, Russia had actually placed some Germany-related companies in Russia under administration. And Russia is now threatening to do the same. In this breakdown of the relations between Russia and Germany, how does this help further down the road when mediation should take center stage?
it is clear that Germany is not anymore a mediator in this conflict. It's a partner of and sympathizer of Ukraine. Germany does not have any direct participation in this war except provision of some military equipment. But on political side, Germany is no longer a mediator. Germany changed its policy of Ostpolitik, and Germany believes that this war should be ended on with Russian defeat as a geopolitical competitor. So when it comes to negotiations, I believe there might be maybe when this war comes to diplomacy, it should not be necessary to have any specific mediator, even China or even Vatican, because it will be negotiation between two parts, between two sides of this war, Russia and Ukraine, and all other sides may have only services. So there is I don't see any specific need for Germany to participate in mediation. Because the condition to stop this war is provided by battlefield, not with any mediation. So I don't see any problem that Germany changed its policy, and Germany changed its policy not now. It happened at least a year ago when Germany declared 100 billions of euros for new arms. It was declaration of stopping Ostpolitik conducted for 40 years and changing of the policy. So it happens not now, and I don't envisage any problems with moving to negotiation just because Germany changed its policy.
Mr. Izak, what's the reaction to the recent lowering of the conscription age in Ukraine from, I think, 27 to 25? What's the reaction from the young people of Ukraine, regardless of how patriotic you are? Some people just don't have the, should I say, the backbone to get involved in combat, although conscription does not necessarily mean that you're going to carry a weapon. There are support services for those who cannot actually carry a weapon and go to the front lines. What's the impression of the people of Ukraine? You're in Dnipro, concerning this lowering of the conscription age.
This law on conscription age is just a project now. It's not signed or adopted law. But as I understand, the idea of this law is it's about an upper age of conscription. So it might be good for people who don't want to serve, because before and now, people in Ukraine may be conscripted until 27, and after adoption of this law, they may be conscripted until 25. So it's limitation of age, not widening of conscription. But as I understand what you mean with this question, whether Ukraine is tired with this war, yes, certainly. Ukraine is tired with this war, and people who are in service now, they are in service in army for more than a year, and it's exhausting. Certainly, it's exhausting. But this law is not, I don't see that this exact law is too important for, I believe it does not have a big influence on this problem in either way. So the problem exists about exhausting and this willingness to stop this war as soon as possible. But this law is not about widening age for service. Now, the main source of people for army in Ukraine is mobilization, not conscription. So conscription age is a subsidiary issue. It's not the first issue of this problem.
We've seen images of children running away at the sound of sirens. We've seen images of Ukrainians going to take shelter in subways. It's very disheartening and it's very concerning. Now, are there plans, is there enough in the way of bomb shelters or underground shelters that the Ukrainians are building in the case that these drone attacks get worse or the bombings increase to the extent that children and women are affected? Are they building more underground shelters?
I don't use underground shelters, but many people in Ukraine still use them. But situation now is much better than it was in last autumn or last summer, especially last autumn and winter when Russia started this mass bombing of Ukrainian cities. What is difference? The difference is that now Ukraine has Patriots and a lot of other air defense systems. And the percentage of hitting Ukrainian targets, especially civilian targets, is very low. To say from 100 Russian missiles, maybe a couple hits some targets. But really, it's not pleasant to live in Ukrainian cities, and it's not convenient to sleep when a lot of missiles, drones, and anti-missiles are in use. It's not pleasant, certainly, and many people goes to shelters, but and also in night. But there is no cutting of electricity, no disruption of electricity, no disruption of water, as it was several months ago and last autumn. So in this case, situation is much better. And by the way, after these last drones attacks on Moscow, whoever did it, Putin clearly indicated that this targeting of civilian objects in both countries should be stopped.
Just before we let you go, Mr. Izak, walk us through what an average day in Dnipro will be like when there are missiles or when there are drone attacks. You just said that you don't use shelters. Why don't you use shelters? And then tell us what happens in your case, what your experience has been, so people can get a more visceral understanding of what happens in this war. What has been your experience when you hear the sirens, and what do you do?
It's because I am too tired with my work. I told you that cities in Ukraine have water, electricity, and communal services. All magazines, all shops are working, so all transport is working. So in my case, I'm too tired in late night, and when I go to sleep, I just cannot awake when it happens. But all my neighbors, to be sincere, they don't sleep. At least don't sleep when it happens during the attack. But as I told you, no electricity disruption and no water disruption, and no real heating. Because this work of anti-aircraft and anti-ballistic protection of Ukraine provided with by our partners. So my recipe is to work a lot. It's the only way for serenity in my case. But many people in Ukraine, they just accustomed to living in this situation. So sometimes people with children certainly are more sensitive to these attacks and they try to use shelters. But people who are not, but many people just accustomed to it. So we are living with it. We are think we have some confidence and big confidence in protection with air defense provided by our partners. So there is a hope that we will overcome the situation and win.
I dare say that's very brave of you, Mr. Izak. Work as a panacea for the conflict. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us this morning. Mr. Alexi Izak, the head of Sector, National Institute for Strategic Studies, Ukraine, who joined us virtually from Dnipro. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And we do pray for a speedy resolution of this conflict. After the break, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says Russia cannot veto Ukraine's accession to the body. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Kremlin said that it was concerned about Ukrainian shelling of Belgorod region, a border province which has repeatedly come under attack from Kiev's forces in recent weeks. The Kremlin also says Moscow's air defenses were working effectively but had room for improvement a day after Russia says Ukraine had conducted its biggest ever drone strike on the Russian capital. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that work will continue on improving Moscow's air defenses. NATO foreign ministers met with Norway's royal family in Oslo as members of the military alliance gathered in the city for a meeting seeking to narrow divisions over Ukraine's membership bid before a July summit. Under the chairmanship of Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, the ministers are set to send the message it is not for Russia to decide if and when Ukraine can become the 32nd member of the alliance. The alliance has not acceded to Ukraine's request for fast-track membership, as Western governments such as the US and Germany are wary of any move that might take the alliance closer to war with Russia. Kiev and some of its closest allies in Eastern Europe want concrete steps to bring Ukraine closer to membership to be agreed when NATO leaders hold a summit in Lithuania. Norwegian Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt says that Sweden should become a full member of the NATO military alliance as soon as possible and before the NATO summit in July. Speaking before a two-day NATO meeting of foreign ministers in Oslo, she says Sweden must become a fully fledged NATO member as soon as possible, adding there is absolutely no reason for holding Sweden back.
Sweden now participates in NATO's meeting as an official NATO invitee. Sweden must become fully fledged NATO member as soon as possible and before the summit in Vilnius in July. I've raised it several times when I had a meeting with the Turkish foreign minister. He can unfortunately not come to this meeting because there is going to be an opening session of the Turkish parliament on Thursday. But I have raised this several times. And Sweden fulfills all the criteria. So there is absolutely no reason for holding Sweden back.
Stoltenberg says all NATO allies agree that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance. Speaking ahead of a meeting of NATO foreign ministers in the Norwegian capital, Oslo, Mr. Stoltenberg says he will soon travel to Turkey to discuss Sweden's NATO membership bid, but noted Sweden already enjoys a high degree of protection from US-led military alliance. He also adds that the violence against the alliance's the Kosovo force keepers in Kosovo was totally unacceptable.
All allies agree that it is for the NATO allies and Ukraine to decide when Ukraine becomes a member. It's not for Moscow to have a veto against NATO enlargement. Sweden is now integrating more and more into NATO structures, our military structures, our civilian structures, and several allies also provided bilateral security assurances for Sweden. So it's absolutely inconceivable that there will be any threat or any attack against Sweden without NATO reacting. I will travel to Ankara in the near future, exactly when it's not yet decided. So what we have seen in Kosovo is increased tensions, and we have also seen the violence against NATO peacekeepers, the KFOR forces. And this is totally unacceptable, unprovoked violence against peacekeepers from NATO with a clear UN mandate. So the first deployment of extra troops will be around 700, and they are on their way. But of course, this does not mean that we are giving up on a political solution. Our message, both to Belgrade and to Pristina, is that they have to engage in good faith in the EU-facilitated dialogue. That's the only path to peace.
Georgian President Salom Zurabishvili has urged the European Union to grant her country EU candidate status, arguing it'll help European security, boost the bloc's regional influence, and help democracy in Georgia. Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine applied in the wake of the Russian invasion in February 2022, but the EU granted the status only to Ukraine and Moldova. Speaking at the European Parliament, the Georgian president says European candidate status is not only about essential democratic recommendations, but also about the future European security architecture. It's about long-term stability. Europe understands the importance of this region for the new world that is emerging. She adds that her country will act as a pro-European force in the region. Here in Africa, BRICS foreign ministers are meeting today in Cape Town, in South Africa, hosting this year's summit, and a major distraction has been an international criminal court arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin if he arrives in South Africa for the summit. This is expected to top some deliberations of the foreign ministers' meeting. Our correspondent Innocent Samosa is at the venue. He joins us for an update. Innocent, it's good to see you. Can you tell us whether there is information that Vladimir Putin will indeed be in South Africa for the BRICS meeting? We know that Sergei Lavrov has been on a whirlwind tour of Africa, albeit hushed. He's been in Kenya. Is there any word from the Russian embassy in South Africa that Vladimir Putin will indeed be there?
Yeah, indeed. A very good morning to you. We are indeed coming to you from Cape Town, the mother city. We're, of course, following the ministerial meeting here in Cape Town. The ministers of international relations are meeting here to deliberate on a number of issues. And of course, on the ground, there's, if you like, mixed feelings, a dichotomy, if you like, for want of a better term. Yesterday, in fact, the opposition party, the main opposition party in South Africa, was striking, demonstrating, saying that they don't want to see President Putin in South Africa. In fact, the mayor of this province, in fact, said that if he comes here, he'll personally arrest him. But of course, we since heard from the Department of International Relations Minister Naledi Pandor, saying that they are giving every delegate and immunity to basically come here and they're in fact protected. They say that they're doing this as a routine. In fact, it's not something new. They say.
Our correspondent Innocent Samosa in Cape Town speaking to us on the BRICS meeting that is being expected.
It's now standing at 19 rands 87 cents up against the euro. A number of conversations here. In fact, some of them have also said that they want to move away from the Belgium SWIFT bank the messaging system. As you would know now, that Russia has been cut off from using that particular system. And some, of course, are also speaking about some sort of an BRICS rating agency that will personally compete with the Western rating agencies, because they feel that some of these rating agencies, they say they come across as not fair when it comes to rating emerging markets in the African continent. But of course, we understand now that it's all system go. Today, the ministers will meet at 2 o'clock to give opening remarks, and later on, they will, of course, give their, a joint press briefing in that regard. But we understand now that as it stands, we are expecting the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, to come here in August for the BRICS meeting.
We look forward to the result of that meeting that you just mentioned. Is this Russian invasion of Ukraine therefore cutting polarized opinion across South Africa? Because you mentioned that some individual, some official was calling for his arrest. But we also know that there is a lot of support from some parties in South Africa for the Russian cause. Is there polarization going on?
Absolutely, absolutely. South Africa is the member of the ICC. In other words, we were supposed to actually arrest him if it comes to South Africa. But because of this diplomatic immunity, he's now protected. Of course, there's been a lot of, division in the political sphere, where, as I've mentioned, that the Democratic Alliance, the main opposition party, has been calling for his arrest. And you have the African National Congress Secretary General saying that there's no need to actually do that. In fact, because we are part of BRICS, so there's no need to essentially do that. It does come across as a division, if you like, because there are different sentiments with regards to his arrest and people not arresting him. So yeah, and also people are citing the issues around the fact that if South Africa does not arrest him, this could very well be that the rand will slump to that 20 rand mark against the US dollar. And of course, many traders have been saying that will be very difficult for them to essentially, trade, given the fact also of the challenges of load shedding in the country.
So if I'm to understand what you're reporting, so South Africa does not want to run afoul of the ICC to which she's a member, neither does she want to display disloyalty to BRICS. So she's in a bit of a quandary.
Yeah, absolutely. You can put it like that, because, I mean, it would seem like really, because when you ask the Minister of International Relations here in South Africa, Dr. Naledi Pandor, she says that they will not allow Western countries to essentially tell them who is their enemy. So, in other words, she says that we're not in war with Russia, and we're not, we're not also standing with the Western countries. But in other words, she says that they're totally opposed to the unilateral sanctions as they come with far-reaching, implications. So they still advocate for a peaceful, settlement in Ukraine. So in other words, South Africa, if you like, they're in the middle. They're really advocating for peace settlement in Ukraine. They don't want to, stand with the West. They don't want to stand with Russia at the same time. So that's where we find ourselves here today.
Finally, Innocent, your president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has been advocating this peaceful solution that you're talking about with the African mediation and other countries in Africa who are thinking of the African Peace Mission. And he also called for an investigation into the allegations that South Africa had knowledge of the berthing of the vessel that allegedly said to have weapons for Russia. Finally, can you tell us, because this is the shadow of what's happening in view of the BRIC meeting that's going to happen, can you tell us at what point that investigation is going and how much of an impact it's having on opinions about South Africa's support for Russia.
Absolutely. It has, in many respects, brought a lot of confusion, particularly to the West. But the American ambassador who actually came up with the news, he has since apologized because he didn't have all the facts about that ship, that, if whether or not South Africa gave arms to Russia. But the Minister of International Relations said, because also there were talks around the military drills between Russia, the latest one that we had with Russia, and also we had a military drill with China, saying that this is nothing new. Since we are partners of the BRICS bloc, we normally do a military drill. So they have now put together a commission to actually look into that as to whether or not there were arms provided in that particular day. But also, in other words, this will also bring a lot of confusion, because you know that there's been a lot of commissions of inquiries, and these commissions, they use a lot of money also, which South Africa does not have at the moment. We have so many challenges that we can direct the funds to essential spending, if you like. So right now, they've put together that commission to actually look into it. But we heard also the chief of soldiers speaking there, saying that they've never provided arms, and then they also saying that they don't have the capacity of arms to provide to Russia. But there is that commission sitting right now to actually look into those allegations.
And all eyes, or many eyes, will be on this BRICS meeting. Thank you so much, Innocent Samosa, our correspondent in Cape Town, for your reporting.
Thank you so much.
After the break, ex-comic sets his sights on Ukraine's reconstruction after helping fund the war effort. Details after the break. Please join us again. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. The United Nations has proposed that Kiev, Moscow, and Ankara start preparatory work for the transit of Russian ammonia through Ukraine. Now, the UN wants parallel talks to be held on widening the Black Sea deal that was agreed last July to include more Ukrainian ports and other cargo, citing a source close to the talks. According to that source, Ukraine and Turkey have agreed to the new proposal intended to improve operations in the Black Sea grain export corridor, but Russia has not responded. Finally, from the purchase of surveillance drones and armored vehicles to providing access to a satellite, fundraiser Serhiy Prytula has helped power Ukraine's army during Russia's invasion. Now, the comedian-turned-politician's charitable foundation is setting its sights on the next big battle post-war reconstruction. 41-year-old Prytula led a campaign to acquire Turkish drones after Russia's full-scale invasion in February last year. The foundation, called the Serhiy Prytula Charity Foundation, then went to purchase access to a finished-made satellite for around $17 million to take photos of Russian troops' positions, including in Crimea.
After the war, I think that mostly our civil society, and here in part of which is volunteer movement of Ukraine. So we will work in the case of rebuilding of Ukraine, because that's also big trouble, because Russians destroyed Ukrainian cities and towns and villages, and a lot of people, they are refugees now in European Union and other countries, and exactly we need to find solution how to bring people back to Ukraine. It's really cool to feel this support every day. That's the biggest motivation for us to understand that we are not alone in this war with Russia, that we have good friends behind us. That's about $9.5 million USD, and we bought those drones, and after that we bring them to our intelligence, and I forget about it on the second day. So I don't know how they use it.
That's where we leave it for today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching. You have a good day, and please join us again tomorrow.